In developmental psychology, the earliest bond teaches a child one essential lesson: how much the world will resist them. She never learned that lesson. Her mother's death removed the first natural boundary a child encounters: gentle correction, emotional mirroring, restraint. What followed was not neglect, but overcompensation. Her father filled silence with presence. But presence without limits creates confusion. She didn't learn patience. She learned urgency. She didn't learn empathy. She learned response. If she cried, the world moved. That pattern would never leave her. By age 5, patterns had already emerged. At a private preschool, she shoved another child during an argument over a toy. The teacher intervened. The school called home. The next week, the classroom received new equipment. The complaint disappeared. At age 7, she broke a neighbor's window during a tantrum. The family expected an apology. Instead, they received compensation and silence. Psychologically, this teaches a powerful lesson. Behavior doesn't need correction if power can erase reaction. By age 10, she wasn't afraid of getting in trouble. She was confused when people expected accountability. Her birthday parties became events, not because of joy, but because of scale: expensive gifts, exclusive invitations, unspoken hierarchies. One year, a classmate was excluded after disagreeing with her. When asked why, she said something simple: "They don't deserve to come." This wasn't cruelty yet. It was social experimentation. She was learning who mattered and who didn't. Adolescence intensified everything. Hormones met immunity. Impulse met protection. When she stayed out late, no one grounded her. When she lied, no one challenged her. Her father hired drivers, assistants, tutors, layers of distance between her and consequence. Psychologists call this externalized regulation. Someone else manages the fallout. And when that happens long enough, internal restraint never develops. Friend 1, the imitator. She wanted status, and proximity to wealth gave her identity. She mirrored behavior, copied language, escalated recklessness to stay relevant. Friend 2, the thrill seeker. Bored easily, chased sensation. She didn't fear consequences, she doubted they existed. Together, they formed a closed psychological loop. No dissent, no reflection, only reinforcement. One night, after a party where her friends felt embarrassed by security turning them away, she took them shopping. No occasion, no apology, just control. Designer clothes, accessories. A quiet message beneath the generosity: stay close. I take care of mine. From that moment on, loyalty wasn't emotional, it was transactional. Disagreeing with her meant risking access. At university, her behavior escalated. She publicly humiliated a classmate during a group presentation. The student filed a complaint. The complaint vanished. Later, she damaged property at a party. Security identified her. Administration intervened not to discipline, but to contain. Institutions don't always protect individuals. They protect donations. Timmy entered her life at a moment of emotional drift. He was attentive, impressed, grateful. Psychologically, Timmy exhibited anxious attachment, fear of abandonment, desire for approval. She offered access. He offered compliance. When she crossed lines, he rationalized. When she drank excessively, he stayed silent. Not because he agreed, but because speaking up risked being replaced. After an argument, one where Timmy questioned her behavior, she resolved it the only way she knew how. She bought him a car. No conversation, no resolution, just leverage. From that moment on, Timmy stopped challenging her, because now, disagreement came with debt. By this stage, the system was complete. A woman conditioned to feel untouchable, friends dependent on access, a partner afraid to resist, institutions unwilling to intervene, and beneath them all, people without power. The night that would expose everything wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. Most turning points don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly disguised as routine. The invitation came in the early evening. Short, casual, familiar. Another gathering. Another night that promised nothing new. She didn't check the time, didn't ask who was hosting, didn't ask how long it would last, because nights like this had never required caution. For years, every night ended the same way, with someone else fixing the consequences. That expectation shaped her response. She got dressed without urgency, messaged her friends without concern, assumed the driver would be available until he wasn't. And for the first time, a small variable entered a system that had never needed one. The party was already alive when they arrived. Music spilled into the driveway. Laughter blurred into noise. Time began to lose definition. She moved through the crowd effortlessly. Familiar faces, familiar reactions. People watched her drink. They always did. But watching is passive. Intervening is confrontational. Someone made a comment, half joke, half warning. It dissolved into laughter. Her friends refilled her glass. Not maliciously, automatically, because stopping her would have meant questioning everything they'd normalized. Timmy noticed more than the others. He always did. Alcohol doesn't just slow reaction time, it narrows perspective. For someone already conditioned to feel safe from consequences, it doesn't create recklessness, it removes hesitation. She didn't feel out of control. That was the danger. She felt confident, clear, capable. Timmy suggested leaving early, suggested calling the driver, suggested waiting. Each suggestion was dismissed gently at first, then firmly. Her friends echoed her confidence. She's fine. It's close. She's done this before. Group agreement has a way of quieting doubt. The driver wasn't there. No explanation, no backup plan, just absence. She stood by the car, keys in hand. This was the moment where everything could still stop. Timmy hesitated. This was his moment. But confrontation requires courage, and courage is harder when power is uneven. He imagined the argument, the embarrassment, the fallout, and he stepped back. She took the driver's seat, closed the door, and in that small, quiet action, the night crossed a line it could never uncross. The road felt familiar. Streetlights passed rhythmically. Music played softly. Speed didn't register as speed. Then something appeared ahead. Too late. There was no chaos, no dramatic sound, just impact and silence. The car stopped. So did everything else. Time didn't shatter. It froze. Shock doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like focus. She sat still, breathing shallow, mind racing faster than her heart. Her friends arrived seconds later. Timmy followed. No one screamed. No one ran. They stood processing. Phones came out. Not to record, not to call emergency services immediately, but to call people who could manage the situation. Instinctively, power took over. The first lie wasn't spoken out loud to police. It was spoken privately, before authorities ever arrived. She didn't say she had been drinking. She didn't say she had been driving. She said there was confusion. She said it was complicated. And instructions followed. What to say, what not to say, who would handle the rest. By the time help arrived, the truth was already being shaped. Timmy replayed every moment, every chance to stop it, every sentence he didn't say. He realized something devastating. He had known this was wrong, and he had done nothing. Pause. That realization would never leave him. By morning, the fear had settled into strategy. Friends agreed on details. What they saw, what they didn't, what they remembered. Timmy read the messages without replying. Long pause, because once a lie becomes shared, backing out means standing alone. In the minutes after the impact, no one spoke with ease anymore. Conversation became careful. Words felt dangerous. Friend one stopped joking. Friend 2 stopped touching her phone. They stood near each other, but no longer together. This is often the first fracture after shared trauma. Silence where confidence used to live. Friend 1 felt fear first. Not guilt, not sadness. Fear. Her thoughts moved quickly to quickly. What if this ruins everything? What if people start asking questions? What if my name gets mentioned? She began to distance herself emotionally, not from the event, but from responsibility. Psychologically, this is called defensive dissociation. When someone mentally steps back to protect themselves, she started using phrases like, I wasn't really paying attention. I don't remember exactly. I left early. Each sentence pulled her one step away from the truth. Friend 2 reacted differently. She couldn't stop replaying the moment. The road, the sound, the stillness. Her fear came with questions. Should we have stopped her? Should we have called someone? What if someone finds out? These questions made others uncomfortable, because questions threaten group stability, and groups under stress don't want truth, they want alignment. The first argument didn't happen out loud. It happened digitally. Friend 2 asked a simple question in the group chat. What exactly are we saying if anyone asks? The response came quickly. Friend 1 replied, Why are you stressing? Just stick to the story. Another message followed. Don't overthink this. Friend 2 didn't reply, but the fracture had formed. Because once someone questions the story, they become a liability. Timmy noticed the shift immediately. The jokes were gone. The warmth was gone. What replaced it was coordination. He saw how quickly fear reorganized loyalty, how concern turned into instruction, and how easily the group began protecting itself instead of the truth. This deepened Timmy's conflict. He wasn't just afraid of her anymore. He was afraid of all of them. Within days, Friend 2 began pulling away. Missed calls, delayed replies, excuses to avoid being together, not because she wanted justice, but because she couldn't tolerate the lie. This is another common psychological response, moral withdrawal, stepping back to avoid complicity without confrontation. She didn't accuse anyone. She just disappeared. Friend 1 moved in the opposite direction. She became sharper, more controlled, more invested in the narrative. She rehearsed details, corrected inconsistencies, reminded others what to say. Fear had transformed her into an enforcer, because if the story broke, so would her future. Within a week, the friend group no longer functioned as one. They were no longer united by fun. They were bound by shared risk, and shared risk doesn't create closeness, it creates suspicion. Who might talk? Who might crack? Who might disappear? These questions replace trust. Watching the fractures spread, Timmy understood something critical. This wasn't just about protecting her, it was about protecting themselves. And he realized too late that the night hadn't just taken a life, it had poisoned every relationship connected to it. And the lie wasn't just forming, it was splitting people apart. Morning didn't bring clarity, it brought urgency. Phones began buzzing before breakfast, not from friends, but from lawyers, assistants, and intermediaries. In wealthy families, crises don't start with questions, they start with containment. Her father didn't ask what happened, he asked one thing: who knows? Her father had spent decades solving problems with money. To him, this was no different. He believed protection was love. He didn't see a victim, he saw exposure, and exposure in his world was unacceptable. This mindset is known in psychology as instrumental morality, where right and wrong are measured by outcome, not ethics. If his daughter was safe, then the solution was correct. Her driver didn't come to work that day. A coincidence, one that would soon become convenient. He had called in sick, a routine absence. But in crisis, coincidence becomes opportunity. Someone remembered his name, someone remembered his access, and someone quietly asked, "Where was he last night?" The idea wasn't announced. It was suggested, not as an accusation, but as a possibility. What if people assume it was the driver? He usually drives her. Everyone knows he has access to the car. No one said he did it. They simply let the idea breathe. That's how narratives begin. Friend 1 aligned immediately. This solved everything. No confrontation, no moral debate, just redirection. She didn't feel relief, she felt efficiency. And in fear-driven groups, efficiency is loyalty. Friend 2 heard about the driver plan accidentally. A loose comment, a careless assumption. She froze. This wasn't avoidance anymore. This was injustice. Her silence now had consequences. And she knew, once this moved forward, there was no undoing it. They're saying it might fall on him. Pause. She didn't respond. Not because she disagreed, but because she already knew. He wasn't even there. Pause. She looked away. This was Timmy's breaking point. Not the crash, not the drinking, but the choice. Long pause, because now it wasn't about hiding a mistake. It was about sacrificing someone else. Something changed in her during this phase. Not panic, not remorse, but detachment. Psychologists call this moral disengagement. When a person separates themselves from the human cost of their actions. Pause. She stopped saying he. She started saying the driver. Language matters. It makes harm abstract. A statement was drafted. Neutral, careful, incomplete. It didn't accuse. It implied. And implication is powerful, because authorities often fill in the gaps themselves. Pause. Once written, the lie had weight. The driver was confused when he got the call. They asked routine questions. Where were you last night? Why didn't you come in? Did you use the car recently? To him, it sounded procedural. To them, it was positioning. The moment his name entered official paperwork, everything changed. Because records don't ask questions, they preserve assumptions. And once assumptions are preserved, they become facts. Timmy considered stopping it, calling someone, saying something, but fear whispered louder. He wasn't powerful, he wasn't protected, and he understood something devastating. The truth had no defender. For the driver, the day began like any other, quiet, ordinary, predictable, until the knock came. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't dramatic, just firm enough to suggest authority. He wasn't afraid at first. Fear comes when people know they're in danger. He didn't. They asked him questions he assumed were routine, about work, about schedules, about the car. He answered honestly, because innocent people usually do. The interview was polite, almost casual, but small details began shifting. When he hesitated, they interpreted uncertainty. When he corrected himself, they noted inconsistency. This is how innocence starts looking suspicious, not through lies, but through human imperfection. By the end of the day, the narrative had direction, not proof, not certainty, direction. He had access to the vehicle. He wasn't at work. His absence needed explaining, and explanations invite suspicion. He tried calling his employer. No answer. Tried again. Nothing. This is when confusion becomes unease, when silence replaces reassurance. The detective assigned to the case wasn't convinced, not because he had proof, but because something felt rushed. The case had momentum too early, and momentum often hides shortcuts. Within days, the driver's life began shifting. Work paused him temporarily. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors started watching. He hadn't been charged, but accusation doesn't wait for paperwork. The tone changed. Subtle, controlled, questions repeated, timelines challenged. Why didn't you come to work? Are you sure you didn't drive? Is there something you're not telling us? Each question assumed an answer. Psychologically, this is known as cognitive narrowing. Under pressure, people stop thinking clearly. they focus on survival. The driver didn't start confessing, but he started doubting himself, and doubt is dangerous. The detective noticed something crucial. The driver wasn't defensive, he wasn't rehearsed, he wasn't strategic. He was confused, and confusion doesn't align with guilt. There was no clear motive, no eyewitness placing him there, no reason for him to be driving at that hour. But absence of evidence didn't stop the process, because systems don't require certainty, they require progress. Once the story reached the public, nuance disappeared. He wasn't a person of interest, he was the driver. Labels harden quickly, and once hardened, they don't soften easily. That night, he sat alone, replaying conversations, trying to remember details that didn't matter, until now. He wasn't afraid of prison, he was afraid of being unheard. Something unusual happened. The detective turned the recorder off and said, "Tell me what you think really happened." For the first time, the driver wasn't defending himself, he was explaining his life, his routine, his loyalty, his limits. And in that explanation, the story finally made sense. The detective didn't promise anything, didn't accuse anyone else, but doubt had entered the room. And doubt is dangerous. To a lie. By the end of that week, two realities existed. One man losing everything, another family sealing itself tighter. And somewhere between them, the truth waited. The detective couldn't sleep, not because the case was complex, but because it was too simple. Cases that fall together quickly usually do so for one of two reasons. They're obvious, or they're being shaped. This one felt shaped. He read the file again, slowly, not as a narrative, but as fragments, times, statements, assumptions. And something stood out. The certainty came before the evidence. Every time the driver told his story, it stayed the same, not polished, not dramatic, consistent. In investigations, consistency doesn't prove innocence, but inconsistency often exposes guilt. And here, there was none. The detective noticed something else. Interference, but polite. No threats, no orders, just reminders. This is a sensitive case. Be careful how this looks. We don't want mistakes. Power rarely commands, it suggests. He raised concerns casually, not accusations, just questions. Do we actually place him at the scene? Are we certain about vehicle access? Why hasn't anyone interviewed her directly? The response was immediate and telling. We don't need to complicate this. From that moment on, the tone changed. Emails slowed, meetings shortened, access narrowed. In institutions, isolation is the first punishment, not discipline. Distance. That night, the detective made a decision. Not heroic, not reckless, just necessary. He would investigate, off the record. Because once official channels close, only quiet persistence remains. He reconstructed the timeline, minute by minute. Who had the car? Who had motive? Who had protection? And one question refused to disappear. Why was no one asking about her? The friend's statements were too aligned. Same phrasing, same structure, same omissions. This wasn't memory, it was rehearsal. The detective didn't push, didn't threaten, didn't promise protection. He just listened. And listening changed everything. Timmy didn't confess anything. He didn't accuse her. He spoke about pressure, about fear, about how quickly stories hardened. That was enough. Because pressure explains lies, the detective documented everything, not conclusions, observations, patterns, inconsistencies. Truth doesn't need certainty, it needs preservation. Word spread. He was slowing the case, overthinking, becoming difficult. Those words are warnings, not critiques. The message was clear. Wrap it up, move on, protect the process. But the detective understood something crucial. The process was already compromised. He didn't promise freedom, didn't promise victory, he promised effort. "I'll keep asking." For the driver, that was enough. Now it wasn't just a case, it was a choice. Career stability versus moral clarity. And once that choice appears, there's no neutral ground. On the other side of town, a news spread. Questions were being asked, quietly, persistently. The lie had survived silence, but scrutiny, that was new. By the end of this phase, nothing had exploded. No arrests reversed, no headlines changed. But something irreversible had happened. The truth had an ally. The detective began tracking everything, every email, every call, every expense, because power leaves fingerprints, not always on crime scenes, but in patterns. He followed the familiar paths: lawyers, accountants, assistants, and public relations teams. Not as a conspiracy theorist, as a professional looking for anomalies. Timmy's role grew quietly, not as a witness, not as a hero, but as a source. He described the party logistics, who arrived and when, how decisions were made under pressure. Each detail was small, each detail was critical, because in investigations, the smallest inconsistencies often crack the largest lies. One of the first leads was financial. Luxury isn't discreet. Expensive gifts, refilled tabs, private clubs all leave trails. The detective noticed patterns: friends' weekend extravagances, Timmy's subtle sponsorships, even the way alcohol was consistently available. He realized the party was always funded, always managed, always protected. The group wasn't just friends, they were part of a shield. Friend 1 acted as the communicator. Friend 2 morally conflicted, hesitant. Timmy internally torn but observant. Each had a role. And each role reinforced the illusion. She wasn't driving. He can't prove anything. It's all fine. Timmy spoke quietly one evening. They'll fight if someone looks too close. I've seen it before. They call it loyalty. I call it fear. He warned the detective. Legal teams were ready. PR spin was immediate. Influential allies already moving. He didn't say it to discourage him. He said it to prepare him. The detective focused on money. Small transfers, reimbursements, unexplained cash movements. Patterns emerged. Who covered party expenses? Who had motive to protect her? Who had incentive to redirect blame? Money doesn't lie. People do. A discrepancy appeared, not huge, not visible to casual observers, but noticeable to someone trained to see anomalies. A reimbursement check was dated after the crash, for alcohol purchase before the night in question. Small, technical, but telling. Friend 2's fractures began to show more clearly. She avoided the group. She questioned herself. She considered confessing. The detective noticed, not by direct report, but by small patterns: missed calls, withdrawn communication, conflicted statements. Her hesitancy became a clue. Timmy carried guilt quietly. He knew the driver was innocent. His silence had cost a man everything. The wealthy girl he protected would never fully understand. He wrestled with whether to act, but action had consequences. His friends would see him as a traitor. She would see him as a liability. The detective needed patience. The detective conducted new interviews. Staff members who served drinks, party planners, security personnel, all asked neutral questions, but observed for hesitation. Patterns emerged. Stories aligned too perfectly. Key absences were ignored. Fear influenced recall. Small inconsistencies started to appear. Friend 1 couldn't remember a detail she previously emphasized. Friend 2 changed the order of arrivals. Timmy hesitated over minor logistics. Each tiny deviation was a crack in the narrative. He requested camera footage, traffic cams, nearby businesses, parking lots. Every camera was a chance to confirm or deny the official story. The detective knew the system was stacked against him, but truth has persistence. Unexpectedly, small anonymous tips arrived. Details overlooked: who called whom before the night, who arranged transportation, who had direct access to the car. Each note became another thread. Even power has limits. Small delays, unexpected questions, subtle persistence. These forces don't break systems openly. They break the illusion of invincibility. Every lead carried risk. Every question risked career, reputation, relationships. But the detective knew, without pressure, the lie would solidify. Without patience, the innocent man would be lost forever. Finally, Timmy agreed to give his full account. Not public, not dramatic, but detailed. He described what actually happened, who made decisions under influence, how the night unfolded. And just like that, the first real cracks appeared in the wall of protection. By nightfall, evidence, patterns, and testimony had aligned. Not enough for a headline, not enough for an arrest, but enough to challenge certainty. The lie was no longer untouchable. Timmy finally agreed to sit with the detective in a private location. No cameras, no witnesses. He laid it out quietly. How she acted that night, who drank what and when, how friends had reinforced the lie, where she had full control of the car. For the first time, someone outside the family knew exactly what had happened, and that knowledge carried power. The friends were no longer coordinated. Friend 2's conscience had begun to break her silence. Friend 1 doubled down, increasingly anxious. Minor disagreements grew loud and public. Fear and guilt aren't equal partners. Some people crumble under one, some under the other, and the tension was visible, even without words. The detective returned to surveillance footage, traffic cams, parking lots, party entrances. He began piecing together the timeline minute by minute. Every hesitation in the friend's statements, every unaccounted for detail, every subtle movement now had context. It all pointed to one truth: the driver had never been in the car. The detective arranged a private meeting with friend 1. No threats, no orders, just facts. He asked about timeline discrepancies, statements she had given, her recollection of who was driving. Her confidence faltered. She paused before every answer. For the first time, she realized her carefully rehearsed story had cracks. Timmy detailed everything again, slower this time. Exact movements of the car keys, who encouraged her to drive, what statements were rehearsed, who pushed the blame toward the driver. He admitted what he had withheld before. Every omitted detail now became evidence. Friend 2 could no longer lie. She spoke quietly to the detective about her hesitation that night, about the subtle instructions from friend 1, about the fear that had silenced her. Her testimony wouldn't solve everything, but it was enough to start unraveling the protective web. Once the detective presented corroborated statements from Timmy and friend 2, official skepticism finally emerged. For the first time, someone high enough in the system questioned the official narrative. The driver's name wasn't immediately cleared, but doubt had teeth now. The family noticed the investigation slowing down. Reports weren't clean, questions were multiplying. The narrative they had controlled for weeks began to wobble. Power doesn't like instability. It reacts, it protects, it negotiates. Timmy realized the cost of silence. Every day he had stayed quiet, the driver's life deteriorated, and now every small truth he contributed had weight. The choice wasn't easy. It wasn't about loyalty anymore. It was about justice. The detective began strategically presenting evidence, subtle but undeniable discrepancies, rehearsed statements from friends, inconsistencies in timelines, surveillance and purchase records. He didn't attack the family publicly. He didn't accuse her. He simply let facts do the work. After weeks of careful reconstruction, the first formal shift occurred. Not a confession, not an arrest, just acknowledgement. The driver could not have been responsible. Evidence pointing toward him was circumstantial at best. Witness testimony now contradicted the official story. It was the first crack in the armor of the lie. The friends noticed the shift immediately. Fear and guilt collided. Friend 1 became defensive, almost frantic. Friend 2 felt relief mixed with anxiety. Timmy felt cautious hope, still aware of potential consequences. Psychologically, this is when coordinated deception begins to collapse. The driver was no longer the obvious scapegoat. Protective lies were unraveling. Friends' fractures were undeniable. Timmy's role as a witness became pivotal. The lie had survived for weeks, but now truth had found its voice. The detective's patience had paid off. Now, with weeks of evidence, he laid out the findings formally. Not accusatory, not dramatic, just facts. Timeline discrepancies, rehearsed statements, financial trails, witness contradictions, all meticulously documented. For the first time, the official narrative was challenged in a structured, undeniable way. The driver's name, once pinned in certainty, was now being questioned in the system. The detective requested a meeting with the family, not to accuse, not to negotiate, to present facts and patterns and observe reactions. Her father remained composed, controlled the air of absolute authority undisturbed, but the detective noticed micro-reactions, a hand tightening on the armrest, subtle shifts in posture, a glance exchanged between friends present, small signs, but in psychology, these often reveal cracks in control. The friends began to feel the tension acutely. Friend 1 doubled down in an attempt to control the narrative. Friend 2 felt a mixture of relief and fear. Both realized that the careful web of silence was now threatened by facts. Power can shield lies, but it cannot shield inconsistency, and inconsistencies were now visible to more than just one detective. Timmy's quiet courage had grown. For the first time, he spoke in a manner that could not be ignored. He provided detailed accounts of the night. He explained who influenced decisions and who made choices. He revealed the rehearsed statements and the redirection of blame. Psychologically, this is called altruistic courage, taking personal risk to correct injustice. Timmy had nothing to gain financially or socially, everything to lose. And yet he did it. The fractured group could no longer hold. Friend 1 confronted Friend 2. "You're going to ruin everything." Friend 2 replied, "I can't lie anymore. I can't watch him suffer." The collision of fear, guilt, and loyalty reached a peak. This fracture created open windows for the truth to emerge. The detective coordinated with legal advisors carefully. He didn't seek vengeance. He sought accountability, re-examination of statements, evidence verification, alignment of timelines with physical proof. By combining psychology with law, he constructed a chain of reasoning impossible to ignore. Finally, she was questioned directly, not in court, not in public, but in a controlled environment where facts were laid bare. At first, she deflected, she minimized, she smiled confident, but the detective presented timelines, witness statements, financial trails, and contradictions. Even her rehearsed narrative could not withstand it. For the first time, cracks were visible, slight hesitation, micro-expressions betraying stress, a tiny lapse in confidence. Psychologists call this micro-failure under cognitive load. When people construct lies, stress reveals truth in the smallest gestures. The friends, under the pressure of facts and ethical conflict, began to give full accounts. Friend 2 admitted omissions and misdirection. Friend 1 revealed pressures to protect her. Timmy corroborated both accounts. The narrative the family had carefully built was collapsing in real time. For the driver, it was a slow, surreal relief. Not immediate freedom, Not media attention, but acknowledgement that someone believed him and that justice could be pursued. Psychologically, validation can be as powerful as vindication. The family's influence began to feel strain. Lawyers pressed for caution. PR teams scrambled to maintain control. Friends were no longer coordinated. Even wealth has limits when confronted with evidence, courage, and fractured alliances. By the end of this phase, the driver's innocence was supported by evidence. Friends had provided full, corroborated accounts. Timmy had committed to the truth. The detective had constructed a narrative based on facts, not fear. The carefully shielded lies were no longer untouchable. Truth had forced its way to the surface. Weeks of evidence, testimony, and timelines finally demanded formal review. The driver's innocence could no longer be ignored. The system, slow and cautious, began to realign facts with reality. For the first time, someone powerful was being questioned. Not casually, not quietly, formally. The friends' fractures had consequences beyond private conversations. Friend 1 was increasingly defensive in public statements. Friend 2 expressed regret privately, leaving digital traces. Contradictions emerged in the social record. Powerful individuals often rely on coordinated narratives. When those narratives break, the pressure magnifies and everyone notices. The detective worked methodically. Timmy, friend 2, and even reluctant friend 1 were prepared to give testimony carefully, factually, without embellishment. This was not about revenge. This was about clarity and accountability. Timmy carried weight like a shadow. He had risked relationships, social standing, and personal safety. Yet the knowledge that the driver had been falsely accused, the innocent suffering while the privileged remained unaccountable, had become unbearable. Psychologically, this is a moral tipping point. He had to act despite fear. She had been shielded by wealth and influence for years, but the detective, armed with facts and corroboration, confronted her quietly. She reacted with disbelief at first, then irritation, then, finally, a subtle recognition that her carefully constructed reality was no longer untouchable. Formal processes began to move. The driver's innocence was documented. Witness statements were submitted. Lawyers attempted to protect their client, but facts now held weight. The investigation had moved from uncertain whispers to formal accountability. The story could no longer remain private. Public attention intensified. Social media discussed the timeline and inconsistencies. Conversations focused on privilege, accountability, and moral responsibility. Questions circulated about how easily power can distort justice. The daughter's world of influence felt pressure like never before. The fractured friends faced personal consequences. Friend 1 tried to maintain control but became isolated socially. Friend 2, freed from deceit, began distancing herself from toxic relationships and fear-driven behavior. Psychologically, truth forced growth or collapse. They could not remain neutral or protected anymore. The driver, once lost in accusation and fear, began to rebuild his life. Small victories mattered. Work reinstated. Community support regained. Recognition of his innocence formally acknowledged. This is the long, slow return of credibility, not flashy or publicized, but deeply human. The daughter faced a new reality. Influence could not shield her completely. Manipulated narratives had limits. Personal responsibility could no longer be ignored. For the first time, the consequences of years of protection and unchecked privilege became psychologically real. Timmy, having taken the greatest personal risk, experienced moral clarity. He had contributed to uncovering the truth. He had stood against fear, loyalty, and social pressure. The relief was quiet but profound. The detective reflected on the cost of justice: time, patience, and methodical persistence. Resistance from systems designed to favor the powerful. Psychological toll on all involved. And yet, he knew, truth doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes, it crawls quietly and survives because someone refused to remain silent. At the conclusion of this long, painstaking process, the driver was cleared of all charges. The friend's fractures reshaped relationships. The daughter faced accountability, privately and publicly. Timmy's conscience was at peace. The detective had preserved truth against powerful odds. Justice had arrived slow, quiet, but irreversible. The driver returned to life slowly. No headlines, no fanfare, just the quiet acknowledgement that his innocence had been restored. Yet the psychological toll lingered. Months of fear, stress, and social exclusion could not be erased overnight. Recovery isn't just legal, it's mental, it's emotional, it's learning to trust again. Friend 1, who had tried to maintain control, now faced isolation. Not just social, but internal. The constant tension between loyalty, fear, and guilt had eroded her confidence. She realized, even minor participation in deception leaves long-lasting psychological effects. Her carefully curated image no longer aligned with reality. And reality is harder to ignore than social pressure. Friend 2 took a different path. She had chosen honesty over comfort. She had faced fear and survived it. She had helped restore justice. Psychologically, this is called post-traumatic growth, the ability to emerge stronger after navigating moral conflict and pressure. Friend 2's life now carried both relief and the weight of witnessing human complexity. Timmy's conscience, once heavy with silence, now bore clarity and quiet pride. He had risked relationships. He had risked reputation. He had faced fear head-on. He had discovered something profound. Ethical courage is its own reward. Yet, the experience left him contemplative. Could he trust friends again? Could he reconcile loyalty with morality? Could he forgive the system that almost let an innocent man be destroyed? The billionaire daughter faced a different kind of reckoning. Not public humiliation, not dramatic arrests, but a personal confrontation with reality. Influence has limits. Lies cannot protect indefinitely. Privilege cannot erase accountability. Psychologically, she now faced cognitive dissonance, the tension between her self-image and her actions. For the first time, her carefully cultivated world felt fragile. For the detective, satisfaction wasn't dramatic. No headlines, no applause. It was quiet. A life saved from injustice. Truth preserved against powerful forces. The subtle knowledge that persistence matters. Psychologically, this is moral reinforcement. The sense that ethical persistence, even in a system designed to resist it, can succeed. Each participant now lived with the consequences of the events. The driver, free but wary. Timmy, morally reassured but cautious. Friend 1, socially fractured and anxious. Friend 2, empowered but carrying the memory of fear. The daughter, faced with the limits of privilege. The detective, aware that justice is fragile and requires constant vigilance. Psychologically, truth leaves traces. Even when justice arrives, lives are never the same. This story is not about victory or defeat. It is about courage to speak when silence is easier, the cost of power and influence, the psychological complexity of loyalty, fear, and guilt, the slow, quiet perseverance required for truth. For every injustice corrected, there are lessons learned, scars endured, and awareness gained. The driver's life continues. Timmy continues to navigate his moral compass. Friends continue to rebuild themselves or adapt. The daughter continues to confront reality in her own way. The detective continues to ensure that truth, once uncovered, is preserved. Because the story doesn't fully end here, it only pauses, for lives, like truths, continue to evolve. The driver's life had returned to normal in appearance, but beneath it, vigilance lingered. He avoided certain streets at night. He paused before trusting strangers. Every unexpected phone call triggered a brief surge of anxiety. Psychologists call this hypervigilance post-trauma. Even when the threat has passed, the mind remains alert. I'm free legally, but can I ever feel safe? I still see the fear I endured, the days lost. I can't let them happen again. Timmy's moral growth was clear, but the cost lingered. Relationships strained by truth-telling, social circles fractured, a quiet anxiety about trust in others. He wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Could he trust friends again? Could he forgive the daughter he once loved? Could he maintain his integrity in the same social circles? I did the right thing, but the right thing is never easy. And now, I wonder if loyalty and truth can ever coexist. Friend one's isolation deepened, guilt weighed heavily, social ostracism was subtle but relentless. Fear of judgment became a constant companion. Psychologically, this is post-deception anxiety. When someone's lies collapse, the mind struggles to reconcile past actions with current consequences. I thought I was protecting her, protecting us, but I only made it worse. I don't even recognize myself anymore. Friend had grown, quietly, ethically, and psychologically. She confronted fear and emerged with clarity. She had repaired relationships where possible. She embraced a slower, more introspective life. The daughter faced an internal reckoning that no wealth could shield. Cognitive dissonance persisted. Who she believed herself to be versus who she had acted as. Social circles watched silently. Trust with friends and boyfriend now fragile. Her world had visually remained intact, but psychologically, cracks had formed. She thought to herself, I thought I was untouchable, but I see now that power can only shield so much. And the people I thought would never challenge me, they did. The relationship between Timmy and the daughter had shifted forever. Love and loyalty were replaced by distance and reflection. Psychological tension lingered. Betrayal, responsibility, and moral alignment. Timmy wrestled with residual emotions. Affection versus ethics. He thought, I once loved her, but I couldn't protect her, not at the cost of justice. Can I forgive her? Can I forgive myself for what I almost allowed? The story had no clear resolution in human relationships, only subtle evolution. The detective reflected on the human cost. Injustice had almost prevailed. Privilege distorts perception of consequence. Courage, even quiet, has ripple effects. He understood that justice is not static. It requires vigilance, moral clarity, and patience. He thought to himself, truth is fragile. Even when it wins, its effects are ongoing. The lives it touches, they continue to evolve, sometimes in ways the law cannot fully capture. Friendships remained fractured, some permanently altered, some tentatively rebuilt, some filled with residual guilt and cautious trust. Psychologically, human relationships rarely recover fully after moral conflict. Even when justice is served, the mind stores the memory of fear, betrayal, and complicity. Every character had made choices to act or remain silent, to lie or reveal truth, to protect themselves or risk exposure. And every choice had lasting echoes, visible in behavior, emotion, and psychological state. Truth, justice, privilege, loyalty, and fear all intertwined in human consequence. Justice has a cost, courage has a weight, and privilege, even the wealthiest must face the consequences of their actions in quiet, private ways. Years had passed, yet the driver's life remained marked by vigilance. Normal routines restored outwardly. Internally, trust was measured and careful. Emotional scars remained. Subtle hyper-awareness, recurring doubt. Pause. Psychologically, this is called residual trauma vigilance. Even after vindication, the mind maintains alertness to protect against future harm. I've regained my life, but the fear, it never completely leaves. Every step, every glance reminds me to stay aware. Timmy's moral compass had sharpened, but so had his caution. He maintained social distance from the daughter. He nurtured friendships aligned with integrity. He reflected regularly on past moral decisions. Psychologists call this ethical consolidation. the process of integrating past moral crises into stable, reflective personal growth. I survived the storm of fear and loyalty. I acted rightly, but the memory remains. Trust is earned, not assumed, and I must live carefully. Friend 1 continued to live with residual guilt. Social isolation persisted. Relationships were tentative, cautious. Anxiety remained under the surface, flaring at minor stressors. This reflects long-term psychological impact of moral compromise. Actions taken under fear, even if socially accepted at the time, can leave enduring internal consequences. I thought I could control everything, but control was an illusion. And now I have to live with what I did and didn't do. Friend 2 emerged stronger, quietly confident but reflective. She had rebuilt trust selectively. She approached relationships with both caution and moral clarity. She carried a deep understanding of human behavior and influence. Psychologists describe this as resilient moral growth. Trauma and ethical conflict, when navigated successfully, can lead to increased introspection and ethical awareness. She thought to herself, I survived fear and complicity. I learned what courage means. I know now that honesty, even late, shapes the future. The daughter's life had regained superficial normalcy, but internal consequences lingered. Cognitive dissonance persisted. Her self-image versus reality. Social relationships were strained, trust fragile. Occasional private reflection brought unease. Psychologists might describe her state as privilege-induced moral tension, the awareness that wealth and influence cannot indefinitely shield from ethical responsibility. She thought to herself, I controlled so much, yet the truth always finds a way. I see it now, influence has limits, and lies eventually crack. Years later, friendships remained subtly fractured. Friend 1 remained distant. Friend 2 maintained selective connections. Timmy's interactions were cautious, deliberate. Residual tension lingered as a reminder of past ethical dilemmas. Psychologists call this social caution after moral conflict. Trust is forever altered by past ethical crises. Even with justice served, psychological ripples remain. Anxiety, guilt, and reflection linger. Relationships remain fragile. Moral growth and ethical courage shape lives quietly. Privilege meets the invisible boundaries of accountability. Truth is not a moment. It is a process that unfolds over years, echoing in decisions, behavior, and internal reflection. The city itself becomes a silent witness to human choice. Every light reflects a life affected. Every empty street holds echoes of past decisions. Every shadow reminds us that truth and consequence are rarely linear. Pause. Even when justice arrives, the city carries memory of fear, courage, loyalty, and moral failure. The driver reclaimed his life slowly, quietly, without headlines. He rebuilt trust in himself. He reconnected with work and community. He learned the subtle skill of living cautiously without fear dominating every choice. Pause. Psychologically, his journey is a testament to resilience and vigilance. Freedom may be regained, but the mind remembers. Timmy's ethical courage became his quiet legacy. He learned the cost of silence. He embraced responsibility, even when inconvenient. He balanced love and loyalty with truth. Pause. This is the psychology of moral awakening, understanding that doing right is rarely easy, but always transformative. Friend 1's life remained cautious and fractured. Friend 2's life was reflective, deliberate, and ethically guided. Two people who once shared reckless days now lived parallel but divergent paths. One carried anxiety and guilt. One carried moral clarity and subtle empowerment. Pause. Psychologically, this is the divergence of consequence. The same event can leave vastly different imprints on human minds, shaping future behavior permanently. The daughter remained privileged, yet untouched wealth could no longer shield her from internal reckoning. Cognitive dissonance lingered. Social scrutiny was subtle but persistent. Private guilt simmered beneath the surface. Pause. Even without public shame, her mind understood limits. Even unchecked power cannot erase the psychological weight of truth, and the detective reflected on time's effect on justice and consequence. Power and wealth can shield temporarily. Truth requires patience and human courage. Psychological consequences ripple for years, affecting more than legal outcomes. Even after the case concluded, he knew human behavior continues evolving, and vigilance is never truly complete. Justice is a living process. Cases close, but people, they carry the echoes forever. And the echoes shape choices, morality, and trust long after the law steps aside. The story leaves us with questions. Can privilege truly shield someone from moral consequences? Can fractured friendships ever fully heal? How do ethical choices echo in ways we cannot foresee? How does courage ripple silently across lives? The detective understood something fundamental. Justice is a living, fragile process. Human lives ripple long after legal resolution. Courage and vigilance are rarely celebrated, but deeply impactful psychologically. He observed, human behavior is layered, and consequences are long-lasting. The law can correct, but it cannot erase memory. People carry choices forward, sometimes quietly, sometimes with echoes that last a lifetime. The story's moral echoes are subtle, yet profound. Courage must confront fear. Truth is fragile, but enduring. Loyalty is tested in the presence of injustice. Privilege cannot indefinitely avoid consequence, and for every choice, there is a reflection, a ripple, a psychological imprint. The story pauses, but does not fully end. Lives continue, shaped by past decisions. Relationships evolve, sometimes repair, sometimes fracture. Moral and psychological consequences linger unseen. Some echoes of the past may resurface unexpectedly. Can privilege ever fully escape accountability? Can fractured relationships heal completely? Can the human mind ever truly forget ethical transgressions? And in that uncertainty, the story lives on,